Dave Talks Comics, Episode 88, Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga, Part 1. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, a program on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comic books I have read and cartoons I have watched. I talk from my notes. I don't go panel by panel or scene by scene. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This program is not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comics and cartoons, I will probably spoil them in some way. On this episode, I will be talking about Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga, the first three issues, and this is the first three issues as taken from the deluxe version of The Great Darkness Saga. There have been two collections. The first one is considerably shorter. Second one includes about 13 or 14 issues, I believe. And that's the one I'm pulling this from. And it will be, on this episode, I will be covering three issues, and those are issues 284, 285, and 286. I also have a number of notes as you listen to the episode, you'll hear there's a number of times where I'm not sure about what somebody's powers are or what the history of something is. So I did a bit of research after I recorded the bulk of this episode, and so I have quite a bit of notes at the end on follow-up on some of those things. Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga, Part 1, Issues 284 to 286. First, I'm going to start with the bad news. I bought this series just recently, this collection, through Amazon, through the Kindle store. I saw it on Comixology, excuse me, I saw it on Comixology, and I saw it on the Amazon Kindle store. It was slightly less on the Amazon Kindle store, so I bought it there. Unfortunately, it's substandard, I find, on the Kindle, at least on my 7-inch tablet it is. I have a 7-inch, I had a 10-inch tablet. The 7-inch tablet is what I carry with me when I'm traveling, when I'm commuting to the office. And so that's what I usually read on. And the pictures are a little small, and unfortunately, for some reason, when I turn the Kindle sideways, it won't adjust. It doesn't turn the picture sideways. And the weird thing is that I've had this work with other books that I'm reading, other prose books that I'm reading on the Kindle, but for some reason this Legion of Superheroes collection, The Great Darkness Saga, won't turn sideways, won't turn landscape. So you're stuck with just zooming in on one panel at a time. I also cannot zoom in. You can only just double tap and then it blows up a panel. I prefer to be able to zoom in on the whole page, on the full page, and I can't do that either. So I'm able to read it. I'm able to read it on the train, but I have to put my face very close to the screen to be able to read all the words. So it's a bit of a downer. If I had it to do over again, I would buy it on Comixology, because presumably if I bought it on Comixology, it would be a more versatile copy. Okay, I think there's enough about that. That's the bad part. I think everything else that comes up is good. The next thing I should say is that the Great Darkness Saga was really, I believe, if I remember correctly, this was my introduction to the Legion of Superheroes. Although these three issues that I'm going to talk about in this segment, I had not read before. The ones, I believe I'd started with issue 287, which will be the issue that I'll pick up with on the next installment. So I had not read these issues before. And why don't I get into them? So the first one is issue 284, which is called The Soul Thief from the Stars. All of these are written by Paul Levitz. This one is drawn by Pat Broderick and Bruce Patterson. Broderick is the penciler and Patterson is the inker. And the first thing that I noticed in reading this story and in flipping back through it is that there are lots of characters and there's lots going on. And I will address that a little later on, but I mean, you get all sorts of members of the Legion of Superheroes, some of whom I'm going to name as I go through this, but I'm not going to go through page by page or panel by panel as I often say in my introduction. I'm just going to try and hit the high points because I don't want to spend hours and hours talking about 3 issues of Legion of Superheroes. The issue opens with a meeting of the Legion at Legion headquarters. You get to see a number of the Legionnaires there. And then it quickly moves on to an attack on Medicus One, which is kind of a satellite. I'm not sure if it's a satellite of Earth. I don't remember, or where it's supposed to be. But it's under attack by this group called the Organ Leggers. And I guess they're stealing body parts, organs. And I guess Organ Leggers is kind of a play on bootleggers. Although bootleggers are people I thought who smuggled stuff, not who stole stuff. But anyway, when I first read this, I thought that the Organ Leggers are wearing these spacesuits, and they look kind of reptilian under the spacesuits. And my first thought was they look Gordanian. And if you've read some of the Omega Men, or even that Omega Men crossover with the New Teen Titans, you'll see the Gordanians, who are these big reptilian-looking creatures. And at first I thought they looked like them. As I went through the issue and as I reread the issue, I noticed that they also showed them outside of their spacesuits, and they're obviously not quite as big as the Gordanians are, although they are green like the Gordanians, and they do look a little like them, but they're just not as big as the Gordanians or as tough-looking as the Gordanians. The Organ Leggers are kind of beaten off by Lightlass and Timberwolf, who just happen to be at Medicus One. And the reason why they're there is because Timberwolf is getting plastic surgery. He's getting his face redone. Now, I don't know the full story behind this, but there's some reference made to the fact that his face looked different before than it does at the beginning of this issue, and that they're changing his face to look back like it originally looked. And I don't know the full story behind that, but I'm sure it's in some previous issue of Legion of Superheroes or one of the other books that the Legion appeared in. After the Organ Leggers have taken off, though, something explodes. One of them throws something, and something explodes, and this guy appears named Organis. And he's kind of like Parasite, the Superman villain, in that he can steal power from people or absorb their abilities, because in fighting the Legion of Superheroes, not just Lightlass and Timberwolf, because some other members of the Legion show up, he seems to absorb their powers. Now, I looked him up on Comic Book DB, and he does not have very many appearances. In fact, I think this is only one of 2 appearances that he has. But this is his first appearance. The scene shifts at some point back to Legion HQ, and you get to see a game of Dungeons and Dragons being played by Brainiac 5, Sunboy, Element Lad, and Cosmic Boy. And I've got to apologize if I'm not going into all the superpowers of all these members of the Legion. The 2 I mentioned before were Lightlass and Timberwolf. Timberwolf is very fast, and he looks, he doesn't really look like Wolverine, but he always made me think of Wolverine. I guess it's the name, Wolverine and Timberwolf. I don't know, and I'm sure that was intended in some way, although I'm not sure. Timberwolf may precede Wolverine. I'm not certain on that. Certainly, he certainly appeared before Wolverine became popular with the X-Men in the mid-'70s. I'm almost certain of that, although I didn't look it up. Lightlass used to be Lightning Lass, Lightning Lad's brother, but then her powers changed at some point because there was this whole thing about how members of the Legion can't have the same powers as another member of the Legion, and so instead of having lightning powers, then she gained powers, and I'm not sure exactly how this happened. She gained powers to make things lighter, and so they're fighting. So first they fight off the Organ Laggers, then they fight Organis. Now, while they're fighting Organis, so the members who were playing Dungeons and Dragons, Brainiac 5, who's very smart, he has a force field and on his belt, and he's kind of the brains of the operation, I guess you could say. Sunboy, whose powers are heat based, kind of similar to the Human Torch, but not exactly the same. Element Lad, who can transmute things, I believe, into different elements, kind of like Firestorm, I guess, but not exactly. Certainly doesn't have the flaming head. And Cosmic Boy, oh gosh, I can't remember. I want to say his powers have to do with magnetism, but I'm not entirely certain. So they beat off Organ. Oh, and the other guy who shows up with them is Block, who's this big rock-like. He's humanoid, but he's definitely much bigger than human, much heavier than human. In fact, he has to. Well, the Legionnaires wear these flight rings, which serve both. They both give them the ability to fly, and they also serve as communicator devices. And because Block is so big and heavy, he actually has to wear 3 flight rings in order for these things to be effective. Although they do actually mention that in this issue, or in one of these 3 issues, certainly. The other thing I wanted to mention at this point is that throughout this series, throughout this storyline, you see a number of couples. There's a lot of relationships amongst the members of the Legion of Superheroes. In this one, you see Bouncing Boy and Duo Damsel, who are married. They are, at this point, they are stepping back from active membership in the Legion, and they're I guess becoming inactive members, or I think they had another word for it, but so they're kind of stepping down as active members. They show them on monitor duty at one point, and yeah, I think that's about all to say about them. And the other couple that you see, well, I already mentioned Light Lass and Timberwolf. I'm not sure if I mentioned that they are a couple, but they are. Although I don't think they're married, but I'm not certain. And then you also see Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad, who are a couple. And I think both of them were two of the original members of the Legion of Superheroes. And then throughout these issues, you will see these relationships kind of change and evolve. And I think that's part of the reason why they started this early, because you don't really see what is considered the big villain, who, if you've seen the cover to the Great Darkness Saga, you should know who the big villain in this story is. You don't see any signs of the villain at this point in the story. So it was a little unclear to me as to why, at the point that I read this first issue, why they would include this in this collection. But I guess there's things that are kind of weaving together. You do see plot lines weaving throughout this, and I'll talk about that a little more. But I'm going to move on now to issue 285, which is called Night Never Falls at Nullport. Now, this is by the same team. That's Paul Levitz is the writer, Pat Broderick's the penciler, and Bruce Patterson is the inker. In this issue, 5 of the members of the Legion, Starboy, Shrinking Violet, Colossal Boy, Shadow Lass, and Mon-El, have traveled to Nullport. They're supposed to be picking up a new starship. I think it's just one, although in the end I think they end up getting 5 of them from Nullport, which is this big, I guess, port facility where they build and repair starships. Starboy, I can't remember exactly what his power is. Shrinking Violet, as her name implies, is able to shrink real small. Colossal Boy is able to grow very large, although I think at one point it was revealed that his power wasn't that he was able to grow as much as that he was able to shrink, that he comes from a... But I'm not certain about that. Yeah, I should probably not say that. Shadowlass has the ability to create these like darkness and plunge things into darkness. And Mon-El is kind of like, at one point it was believed he was a Kryptonian, I think, but I think later on it turned out he isn't Kryptonian, but he has a name that sounds Kryptonian, and he kind of has similar powers to Superboy. Or Superman. But of course Superboy has a relationship with the Legion of Superboy heroes, because originally when the Legion first appeared in a crossover, well, it wasn't really a crossover, they first appeared in a Superboy story when three of the Legionnaires, well, the only three Legionnaires at that point, came from the future. And I believe that was Saturn Girl, Lightning Lad, and is it Sun Boy? I don't think so. Was it Cosmic Boy? It might have been Cosmic Boy. I'm not sure. I'm not as up on the Legion of Superheroes as I probably could be, but I do like some of these stories. And I especially like the ones that are written by Paul Levitz, like these. So they've traveled to Nullport to pick up this spaceship, but then it turns out that something's going on. There's sabotage, which they later learn is by the Khunds, and that's Khund. Khunds, which is a race of, they're humanoid, they're pink skin, but they have pointy ears, and this is not their first appearance. They first appeared in Adventure Comics number 346, which is interesting for a number of reasons that I'll get into which is a significant issue, let's put it that way, as I go through these three issues, this issue and the next one. And they have appeared many times in between there and this point, and they appeared many times and many times since. So this is not one of these races that appeared just once, or somebody like Organis who only appeared twice or something like that. There's another character who appears in this who's kind of weird looking, kind of interesting looking. His name is, I'm guessing on the pronunciation of this. I'm going to guess it's Hurnath. Yes. Okay, I'm going to go with that. Hurnath. And it's spelled H''Hrnath. And he is the administrator or the boss of Nullport, and he kind of has a horse's head, but he's got what it looks like human arms and hands, but then he's got these tentacles coming out of his body, and he smokes a cigar, and so it's kind of interesting looking. This is his first appearance. He appeared in four subsequent issues of the Legion of Superheroes, and I'm going to digress here for a moment to say that to talk about the Tales of the Legion, because this series of the Legion of Superheroes, these are issues 284 to 286, I believe, is what I'm reading here. 285 to 280. Hold on a second. 284 to 286, yes. And after issue 313, the title changed names to Tales of the Legion. And then they started a new Baxter paper run. This was on higher quality paper. This was a comic book that was only distributed through comic book shops, which was called Legion of Superheroes. That started in 1984. That's when this changeover happened. And the Tales of the Legion book was distributed everywhere, so it could be purchased in comic book stores and on newsstands. But only from issue 314 to 325, the first, what would that be, 12 issues of the Tales of the Legion, was it original stories. And then after that, from 326 to 354, it was reprints. And so it reprinted the first 29 issues of the other series, the Baxter series. And then at that point, I think, well, they stopped it, and I'm not sure if the Baxter series started to become available on the newsstand or it was still only available in comic book shops, but they definitely stopped the reprint series at that point. And I believe that was around 1989. Let's see, what else? There anything else? Oh, well, the reason why I brought that up was because I had mentioned something similar to that when I talked about Tales of the Teen Titans in a previous episode, when I talked about the Batman and the Outsiders New Teen Titans crossover. I believe that was Dave Talks Comics episode 82. And so the reason why I brought this up was because Khunds appeared in 4 issues of the 1984 series of Legion of Superheroes. I'm not going to list those issues here. And then he appeared in an episode of Final Crisis. But that's really it. So he really doesn't have that many appearances. Unfortunately, you can track down appearances of characters through Comic Book DB, but what you can't find are things like appearances of like places and things like that. I really wish they had that. They do have appearances of groups, which is how I was able to track down some information on the Khunds, but not places or things, like artifacts or things like that. It really would be useful if they had that if they had categories for those things in the Comic Book DB. So while those 5 Legionnaires are fighting while they're dealing with the sabotage by the Khunds, you get a interlude on Orando. Now, Orando is the planet where Princess Projectra, another member of the Legion of Superheroes, whose superpower is to be able to create illusions, she and Karate Kid, who were planning to get married, are on her home planet of Orando. I was not able to find out when Orando first showed up, but Karate Kid and Princess Projectra both first appeared in the same issue that was the first appearance of the Khunds, which is Adventure Comics number 346. Now, I guess at this point it might be a good time to digress just for a moment to mention that, so the Legion first appeared in Adventure Comics, which at that time was basically a Superboy book, although I think it had some backup features as well. But it almost always featured Superboy on the cover, and this is like the mid-1960s. Maybe even, actually, they may have even appeared in the late 50s. It was the late 50s or early 60s when the Legion first appeared. So the Legion ran in Adventure Comics, and it was basically Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes in Adventure Comics. Then the title changed to, they got their own, or was it that Superboy had his own book and it became Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes for a while, and then eventually that became Legion of Superheroes, which is the book that this is showing up in. And that was like only maybe 2 or 3 years before this. So that was like the mid to late 70s when that happened. So Adventure Comics 346, where the Khunds first appeared, is also the first appearance of Princess Projectra and Karate Kid. So in this issue of Legion of Superheroes, number 285, we see a couple pages of Princess Projectra and Karate Kid on Orando, Princess Projectra's homeworld, and they're there to get her father's blessing because they want to get married. Now her father is the king, King Voxv or Voxv. Voxv. I'm not sure. But they're there to get his blessing when all of a sudden he collapses. And as we find out later on, this is his last appearance because he's dead. And I'll get into that a little more in the next issue. So that's really all that you see on Orando in this issue. So then the scene shifts back to Nullport. We get the rest of the story at Nullport. It turns out the Khunds are the one behind this sabotage. There's a Khund warship that's nearby, I guess, planning to take over Nullport. But because the Legion found out about it, 3 of them, the 3 guys, take off. Colossal Boy, Mon-El, and Starboy take off. They beat up the Khunds, and the day is saved. And they work out a deal with Khunds of Nullport, and in the end they get more ships than they were originally planning to. And then the other thing is that you see Mon-El moves Nullport a few dozen light years, and that's a quote, to protect it from the Khunds. So he moves it further away from where the Khunds part of the galaxy is. So obviously Mon-El is extremely strong. I mean, this is before Crisis on Infinite Earths, so this is when Superman was still, planet moving. Now, Nullport is not a planet. I believe it's on an asteroid or something like that. I think it is an asteroid. I don't think it's a planetoid of some sort. It's not a full planet. But the fact that he's able to move at 12 light years through space says that he's incredibly powerful. Now, there is a backup story in this issue, and it's called The Forgotten Future. This is drawn by Keith Giffen. I'm not sure. This might be his first time working on the Legion of Superheroes. I'm going to have to look that up. I meant to, but I'll look that up and add something about that at the end. It's called The Forgotten Future. It is a Dream Girl story. Dream Girl is a member of the Legion who has the ability to... Well, it's not really an offensive ability or even really a defensive ability, but she's precognitive. She can see things before they happen. And she's back on her home world of Nulltor, Naltor, and for some reason everybody has stopped dreaming. Their precognitive abilities no longer work, and originally, having these precognitive abilities made Nulltor a very peaceful place because it was impossible to plan a crime, or at least that's the way it's presented in this story. Because anybody would know about it. People would be able to foresee what was going to happen. So now the crime is breaking out on Nulltor, and so Dream Girl is there to try and figure out what's going on, although she doesn't have her precognitive abilities, because like everybody else on the planet, they're gone for some reason. Well, she finally figures out that the problem is that recently there has been a gyro stabilizer put in place. Apparently Nulltor was prone to a lot of earthquakes, and this gyro stabilizer stops the earthquakes. And for some reason, something about the gyro stabilizer operates on the same wavelength that their brain waves do, and so she makes adjustments to the gyro stabilizer so that there will be earthquakes, but they'll be very minor. And now everybody can dream again, so the crime rate will go down. And so this is like an 8-page story in the back of the issue. And like I said, it's drawn by Keith Giffen and Larry Malstadt. And and they do mention that she went to the Nulltorian Scientific Institute. And that, I guess, is how she knows enough to know how to fix this gyro stabilizer. But, well, that's it for that story. So the final issue I'm going to talk about is number 286, which is titled Old Friends, New Relatives, and Other Corpses, which is by the same team as in the other two issues. That is, Paul Levitz is the writer, Broderick is the penciler, and Bruce Patterson is the inker. This issue opens with a party on R.J. Brande's planetoid, private planetoid, and you've got Saturn Girl, Phantom Girl, and Dawnstar playing volleyball against Colossal Boy, Lightning Lad, and Sun Boy. Superboy shows up in this issue, and let's see, and then Dr. Skipping ahead just a little bit. Then R.J. Brande and Chameleon Boy show up. Now, one thing that's talked about in this issue, and I assume it was revealed previously, is that R.J. Brande is Chameleon Boy's father. I don't know the details of that, and they don't really go into that. There's a footnote that said it was revealed in a previous issue, but it doesn't even say which issue, so I'm not sure. I mean, R.J. Brande doesn't look anything... They don't look anything similar, R.J. Brande and Chameleon Boy. And I always thought Chameleon Boy was an alien from another planet, but I suppose it's possible that he's a hybrid of two... And so he's part human and part some other alien race? I don't know. But then Dr. Regulus shows up, Dr. Zaxton Regulus. This is not his first appearance. He's the bad guy in this issue, in case the way I said his name wasn't enough of a clue. This is not his first appearance. He first appeared in Adventure Comics number 348, which was just 2 issues after the first appearance of the Khunds and Princess Projectra and Karate Kid, interestingly. And let's see, he's got some sort of heat-based, sun-based powers, kind of like Sunboy does. And so you get a showdown between Sunboy and Dr. Regulus. And Dr. Regulus had appeared a number of times over the years. Well, maybe like about 4 or 5 times prior to this. I think his first appearance was in the late 60s, and he'd appeared a few times since then. And so he's out to destroy this planetoid, and he's using red sun radiation at one point, which of course weakens Superboy, so Superboy can't just, slap him around. And but in the end, of course, the good guys win. But you get a big fight, of course, between Sunboy, which is what's shown on the cover, between Sunboy and Dr. Regulus. And I think that's about it as far as this storyline goes. Well, no, wait, hold on. The other thing is that at one point, Chameleon Boy is getting kind of tired of hanging out with his dad. And so he takes off and he travels back to Earth, which at some point is revealed is something like 54 million miles from R.J. Brand's planetoid. So it's interesting that he's able to travel that far that fast. But I suppose this is the 30th century, so who knows what they've invented. But Chameleon Boy, I don't think he has the ability to teleport. Anyway, he sets something in motion which is going to be picked up on and is going to flow through the next few issues, which is, it's revealed, and I don't know if this is the first time this has been said, but it wouldn't surprise me if it is, that he is the permanent leader of the Legion Espionage Squad. And he enlists Timberwolf and Shrinking Violet to go with him on a secret mission to the Khund world. Well, secret in that they're going to infiltrate the Khund world. It's not secret to the other members of the Legion. And so you just get a couple pages of them talking about this, and Timberwolf and Shrinking Violet and some of the other members who are around and this takes place at Legion HQ, which is on or near Earth. So a discussion ensues between them about this. Some of them think he's acting rashly, that he should wait for, I believe it's Lightning Lad, who is the chairman of the, who was the chairman? No, chairman isn't the right word. He's the leader of the Legion at this point. And although he is at this point? No, I don't think it's at this point he steps. I think it's after this he steps down. But so he enlists them, so they take off, and that's really all you see on this. Kind of like that. There was only a little bit that you saw about that took place on Orlando in the previous issue. But that's it for that story. So now we have another backup story. Now these are backup stories, but they're not really backup stories. I mean, they could all be folded in together, but this one is drawn by a different team, at least. This one is drawn by Keith Giffen, and Bruce Patterson is the inker, and of course Paul Levitz is the writer. And this is called A Crown for the Princess. And it opens with the funeral for King Voxov, Princess Projectra's father. And of course this is all taking place on Orlando. And basically what happens in this issue, and this is not a complete story in that it's setting things up for things that are come down the road. It's a chapter in a bigger story, which is that at this funeral, it seems like what's going to follow is that Princess Projectra is going to become the queen of Orlando. But then her cousin steps forward, whose name is Pharox, P-H-A-R-O-X-X, and challenges Projectra to a duel. And of course, Karate Kid, her fiancé, is her second in this battle. So Princess Projectra fights Pharox, and Pharox is able to take her down very easily, which is a little suspicious. And then Karate Kid takes on Ferox, and Ferox beats him as well. And then you find out that Ferox has a magic-proof helm which protected him from Projectra's powers of illusion to project illusions. And so he takes off the helm, and then he is able to use magic to defeat Karate Kid, and so they're both knocked out. And at that point, he declares that they must be the ones who killed King Voxov, King Voxov, and he sentences them to death. Now the execution is not carried out yet; they're still alive. But he sentences them to death, and that's the end of issue 286. So that's the end of those 3 issues. A few more thoughts about this. I wanted to say something about the artwork. I like both artists, both pencilers, Pat Broderick and Keith Giffen. I have a preference for Keith Giffen's artwork, and as a way to, if you have these issues, I say look at them and look at how Keith Giffen draws Orlando in issue 286 versus how Pat Broderick draws it in 285. Just the intricacy of the way Keith Giffen draws, like the armor and some of the ceremonial things and some of the architecture. I think it's beautiful. I just love it. And Pat Broderick is good, but it just isn't quite to the level. I mean, it's not way below, but it's just doesn't quite do it for me quite as much as Keith Giffen's artwork does. And I really did like Keith Giffen's artwork at this point in his career. A couple other things. Well, I said before, I think if you listen to this, you could see how things evolve, how you get little bits of these different storylines coming together. And I found that in rereading these issues, that you really get a lot from rereading this, because there was things that I did not see, little things, little mentions of things that I did not see. And so there's really different things flowing through this. You see different relationship type things between the different couples within the Legion, whether it's Karate Kid and Princess Projectra, or Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl. You see some relationship stuff there going on. Light Lass and Timberwolf. You get, you're going to get more later on. There's going to be more later on. Other couples are going to emerge, and then you're going to see some possible infidelity at some point, or at least people tempted to go that way, flirting between people who are not couples at some point. Not yet, not in these 3 issues, but you are going to see it in the next 3 issues. And you see tempers running high. Well, yeah, you definitely see tempers running high here. And you definitely will in the next few issues. The cases I'm thinking of are in the next few issues. But, so I think I understand now why they started at this point, because they're weaving stuff together that does seem to go through this. These are not one-off. I mean, in some ways, some of these stories are one-offs, but at the same time, there's little bits there that kind of all weave together through this storyline and help to explain various things. In the same way that if you look at something like the way Chris Claremont wrote the X-Men back when he was first writing the X-Men, especially in the 10 and 12 2 years leading up to the Dark Phoenix saga, there was all sorts of little things, because if you read the Dark Phoenix saga collection, it only gives you like 7 or 8 issues worth of the story, but there are little things that have been leading up to that all along. I mean, especially since issue 101 of the X-Men. And so I understand now why they started with issue 284 and they didn't start much closer, because at this point you still don't have any hint of who the big bad guy is unless you've looked at the cover of the Great Darkness saga. The other thing I wanted to mention, it's Legion related, but it really has no bearing on this story, and that's that issue 346 of Adventure Comics, which was the first appearance of the Khunds and Princess Projectra and Karate Kid, was also the first appearance of Nemesis Kid, and he only had a handful of appearances. across time. He was kind of a weird character. I mean, Karate Kid was, of course, a martial arts character, which actually, in a way, is kind of interesting because I don't know if that predates the whole martial arts craze. I mean, he first appeared in 1966, so I'm not sure if Bruce Lee's films, if that kind of stuff had become popular at that point. I'm sure there was some underground, but I always associate that with the 70s, but I'm not sure. But Nemesis Kid is somebody who was originally a member of the Legion, and then it turns out he's a traitor. He's working for the Khunds, although he isn't a Khund. And you really have to be careful how you say that word, don't you? And he's a bad guy. He later is a member of the Legion of Supervillains. And there's a great story which is collected in trade paperback called An Eye for an Eye, which the Eye for an Eye collection reprints the first 6 issues of the 1984 series of Legion of Superheroes, in which involves Orlando, the homeworld of Princess Projectra, and involves a big battle between Nemesis Kid and Karate Kid. And I still haven't told you what Nemesis Kid's his power is to be able to do. He gains whatever, and this is really a comic book thing. He gains whatever superpower he needs to defeat somebody. And this is, I looked at the Who's Who. I think it's some chemical, it's one of these cases where he through some chemicals that he swallowed, he suddenly gained this ability to, and they even mention him being able to turn himself into kryptonite to defeat Superboy or something like that. And I have not read the original story. I have only read, I think, the only stories I've read that involve him. And like I said, he does not appear in very many stories, is the Eye for an Eye collection. But it's a very good, if you want another Legion of Superhero story and you haven't read it, I picked it up a few years back when they reprinted it for the first time. And it's a great read. It's all sorts of characters. You get all these supervillains, all these superheroes. I suppose if you don't like that kind of book, maybe it's not for you. But if you do like that, you get all these villains who have similar powers to the superheroes matched up against one another, and it's got some really moving points in it too. There's a few characters get killed, and it's some pretty serious stuff. But so that's it. I think basically for this installment of Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga. I hope to get back to this soon. I have read the next 3 issues, and I hope to record a segment on those soon. And so far, I'm really enjoying it. And it's certainly, I think it's fun. I don't know if it's not, it's good. It's good. No, it's very good. I'm not going to quibble about this. It's very good. Paul Levitz does a great job with this. This is some of his better writing, and this is a great storyline, and I really like the character moments and how he weaves in the different storylines from the different characters, and I've probably said that a number of times at this point. But so there's much more to it than just fights and plot, and there's a lot more to it. So I think it's definitely worth a read if you haven't read it or you haven't read it in a long time. It's worth picking up. And while I don't encourage you, I encourage you if you're going to buy the electronic copy to get it probably through Comixology, not through Amazon Kindle. I'm enjoying this quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to talking about it some more, and I'm looking forward to finishing reading The Great Darkness Saga. Following up on all I've had to say so far about the first 3 issues of The Great Darkness Saga, I have a bunch of notes about some things that I wasn't too sure about when I was recording before. First, I want to start by talking about the publication history of the Legion of Superheroes. Basically from the late 50s when they first appeared to the late 90s. The Legion of Superheroes first appeared, and I might have mentioned this before, in Adventure Comics number 247, which had a cover date of April 1958. And that was basically, it was a crossover, or it was an appearance in a Superboy story. in Adventure Comics. They didn't get a regular stint, a regular run, until Adventure Comics number 300 in September 1962. And from September 1962 until May 1969, they were in every issue of Adventure Comics. So that ran from 300 to 380. Starting in July of 1969, they had a regular stint, although it didn't last it only lasted a little over a year, in Action Comics. And I guess it's also worth noting that they didn't have any cover appearances during this time. They were just, I guess, a backup feature in Action Comics from Action Comics 378 to 392. So that was from July of 69 through September of 1970. In that time period, they also had a few appearances in Superman. Starting in, so after September of 1970, they had a few over the next 3 years. They had about 10 appearances in Superboy in that 3-year time span. And then starting in September of 1973 with Superboy number 197, they were a regular feature in Superboy until the series ended. So from Superboy 197 to Superboy 258, so from September of 73 until December of 79. In fact, it would say Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, or Superboy featuring the Legion of Superheroes, and I believe with issue 231, it looked like on the cover that the title had been changed to Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, but officially the comic book was still in the indicia. On the official name of the comic book was still Superboy through issue 258. Then in issue 259, actually, or maybe it was in issue 258, Superboy leaves the Legion, and they continue with the numbering, but they rename the book to just Legion of Superheroes. So it goes from Superboy to Legion of Superheroes, and that was starting in January of 1980. And that book ran from January of 1980 until July of 1984. It was called Legion of Superheroes, so that was from issue 259 to issue 313. Now, and so that was through July of 84. Then in August of 1984, they started a new book, which was also called Legion of Superheroes. This was the Baxter series. So this was printed on nicer paper. It was a little more expensive than the regular. I think the regular Legion book was something like 75 cents at that point. And this one was, I think, like $1 or $1.25. And it could only be found in comic book stores. It was not available on newsstands. But the Tales of the Legion, so the book which had been called Legion of Superheroes started to be called Tales of the Legion. The title was changed to Tales of the Legion. And then for a year, from issues 314 to issues 325, they continued with original stories in there. But then after that, what they did was they started reprinting the stories from the other Legion of Superheroes book, which was called Legion of Superheroes. And so Tales of the Legion, from issues 314 to 325 was original stories, but then from 326 to 354, which came out in December of 87, it was all reprints, and that for about 29 issues, I think it was. And the other Legion book ran from August of 84 until August of 89, and that was issue 63 was the last issue. Now, there have been plenty of other Legion of Superhero books since then. That's as far as I'm going to go as far as detailing the publication history of the Legion of Superheroes. And, of course, they have appeared in other books. I think usually they're guest stars. I think after they officially got their own book, they were just guest stars in some other books, and they wouldn't be like a backup story that was Legion of Superheroes. So, most of my other notes here are going to be about specific characters and following up on things that I said before. The first character I want to talk about is Timberwolf. I talked about Timberwolf and then Wolverine and how I tended to conflate the two a little bit, or how one reminded me of the other. Maybe conflate isn't the right word. So I went back and I looked. Timberwolf first appeared in Adventure Comics number 329, which came out in December of 1964. Wolverine first appeared in Incredible Hulk number 180, which came out in October of 1974, so 10 years later. So obviously, Timberwolf was not a knockoff of Wolverine in any way, shape, or form. It's possible he was changed in some ways. I'm really not that certain. Well, I know that he was changed because in the beginning of this story, although this was all, well, no, actually it wasn't before Wolverine. At the beginning of this story, he's having plastic surgery or facial reconstruction or whatever you want to call it because at what is it, Medicus One, and that's why he is there. He and Lightlass are there when the organ leggers show up. But so anyway, I don't think there's really much of a connection there between Timberwolf and Wolverine. Was Wolverine a knockoff of Timberwolf? I don't know. I mean, I do know that Wolverine was drawn for a time by an artist who had also drawn Timberwolf. I'm not sure if he was the original artist on Timberwolf, that being Dave Cockrum, because he drew both the Legion and he drew the X-Men. Okay, the next character I want to talk about was Lightlass. Now, she's an interesting character. She's got an interesting history. She's also been known as Lightning Lass, and her real name, her civilian identity, is Ayla Rands. She is the twin sister of Lightning Lad, and I think I knew that, or at least I knew that she was his sister. And she took his place for a time. Lightning Lad was, of course, one of the original members of the Legion of Superheroes. But he was killed, and so then she shows up to take his place. So she first showed up in Adventure Comics number 308, which is cover dated May 1963. Now, that doesn't last too long because Lightning Lad comes back to life. And as I mentioned before, the Legion has this rule where they can't have two characters who have the same power. Although, honestly, it sounds more like something that the editors or the publishers of the comic book would come up with. So in issue 317, she first showed up in 308. So in 317, which is cover dated February of 64, her powers gets changed. Now 317 is also the first appearance of Dream Girl. And Dream Girl uses the technology from her planet to change Lightning Lass, and she becomes Light Lass. And so instead of having lightning powers, she now can affect the gravity of something. She can make something lighter, or I think heavier, but I'm not certain on that. But then she eventually does regain her lightning powers, and that is in the Legion of Superheroes book that began in 1984. In the fourth issue of that, she regains her lightning powers, which came out in November of 84. And that is part of that story which I mentioned before, the Eye for an Eye, which is the first 6 issues of the 1984 Legion book. The other, I wanted to just go briefly, I was a little unclear, or I needed some clarification on the powers of some of these characters, so I looked them up just to be sure. Cosmic Boy's power is magnetism. Colossal Boy's power is growing, it's not shrinking. I don't know where I got that in my head. Maybe at some point that was, they've redone these characters so many times, it's possible that at one point his power was to shrink and not to grow, or maybe it's something that somebody got it in my head somehow, or I don't know. Dream Girl's power is to see the future. The original 3 members of the Legion of Superheroes from Adventure Comics number 247 are Lightning Lad, Saturn Girl, and Cosmic Boy. And of course, Saturn Girl's power is she's telepathic. Keith Giffen was the artist for The Forgotten Future in issue 285, and that was his first work on Legion of Superheroes. Not his first comic book work, but it was his first work on Legion of Superheroes. His first work for DC was in All-Star Comics, in the All-Star Comics Revival. I think it was issue 62 of All-Star Comics. R.J. Brande. Okay, now this is an interesting character. I did not know this stuff. I questioned the fact that it was revealed, it was mentioned, it wasn't revealed in this issue, but it was mentioned in this issue that it had been recently found out that he was Chameleon Boy's father. And I was like, wait a minute, he's human, Chameleon Boy is this other race, which turns out is Durlan, is the name of the race he came from. Well, it turns out that R.J. Brande is also Durlan. He's also a shapeshifter, or he was a shapeshifter. But he got frozen in human form by Yorgian fever. Yorggian. And this had been revealed in Secrets of the Legion of Superheroes, which was a 3-issue miniseries from 1981, approximately a year before the Great Darkness Saga begins. So that's the story, and it was in that issue that it was revealed that R.J. Brande, who'd been around since Adventure Comics number 350, which came out in November of 1966. So he'd been around since then, but I guess it had been believed that he was human up to that point. And so finally in 1981, I guess about 15 years after his first appearance, it's revealed that he's actually Durlan, and he also happens to be Chameleon Boy's father. And actually, that's a series that I want to read, Secrets of the Legion of Superheroes. That's one I want to get my hands on. I would like to read. Now, the Legion Espionage Squad in issue 286, I believe it is. No, 285. No, I think it is 286. Hold on, I'm flipping back through my notes. Yes, it is 286 that Chameleon Boy uses his authority as the permanent leader, the permanent head of the Legion Espionage Squad, to insist that Timberwolf and Shrinking Violet go with him on this mission. Well, I did a little. It actually wasn't that hard to find this information. Well, to find some information. It was a little unclear as to how many times they've showed up, but the Legion Espionage Squad first appeared in Adventure Comics number 360, which is cover dated July of 66. Something's not right here. Because I have issue 350 as being November of 66. Okay, I'm not sure on the dates, but somewhere around there. And the Legion Espionage Squad was originally made up of the heroes who had an easier time disguising themselves. So people like Chameleon Boy and the Invisible... Is it the Invisible Kid or the Invisible Boy? I can't remember. But they do have a page in the Who's Who in the Legion of Superheroes from July of 88, issue number 3. Although I saw a scan of it, there really isn't that much information about the squad. I don't know exactly how many appearances they have had over the years, but it doesn't seem like they're used. It's brought up that frequently because the listing of their appearances, I found different listings in different places and on the internet, in Comic Book DB and in other fan sites. So, but their first appearance does seem to be Adventure Comics number 360, which of course I haven't read. Karate Kid. I questioned the fact that he showed up in 1966 in issue 346 of Adventure Comics. Okay, I think that answers my question right there. Issue 346 of Adventure Comics was dated July of 66. Issue 350 was dated November of 66. And I'm guessing issue 360, I got it wrong probably here in my notes, probably supposed to be July of 67 or something like that. Or I just copied the wrong date. So Karate Kid showed up before like Bruce Lee's movies because I looked them up and they were all dated like early 70s. So Bruce Lee was not, his kung fu films or karate films, or I'm not sure what the exact correct term is, but they had not shown up yet. But in 1966, he was on TV in The Green Hornet. So it is possible that influenced It's possible that influenced whoever wrote that first appearance of Karate Kid. Now, I know that Jim Shooter was right. Yeah, because Jim Shooter wrote the first appearance of the Legion Espionage Squad. I'm not sure if he wrote the first appearance of Karate Kid. That issue 346, which was also the first appearance of Princess Projectra and the Khunds and Nemesis Kid. So that's about it for my notes, my follow-up notes on the first part of Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga. I spent considerably longer than I normally do researching these notes, listening back to what I'd recorded, and then making notes, and then researching the notes. In fact, I listened back to it once, and I lost my notes. I just misplaced them, because I didn't do this. This was like a week or two ago, and I misplaced them, so I had to go back and listen to it all over again. But I was stopping it every few minutes and then going to research stuff. But it was fun. I enjoyed doing that kind of stuff. So I used Comic Book DB as much as I could, but I didn't always find it helpful. So I actually ended up cracking open my issues of Who's Who and using them a little bit. There is a Who's Who in the Legion of Superheroes. It was a 7-issue series from 1988. I do not have that, but I am curious about that. And I also found out that there is an official index of the Legion of Superheroes, which is a 5-issue series from, I believe it's ICG. And so that's something else that kind of interests me. That's it for episode 88 of Dave Talks Comics. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com and facebook.com/DaveTalksComics. On Twitter, at DaveTalksComics. Email can be sent to davetalkscomics@gmail.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I'll be talking about the first 6 episodes of Knights of Sidonia, of Season 1 of Knights of Sidonia. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.